let's have some questions. I'm going to bump open the questions. First question, Kel has asked, can something be practice and conditioning simultaneously? Which is a good question. And the answer to that question is yes, something can be practice and conditioning at the same time. And for us, it's almost necessary that some things that essentially practice, we deliberately make bad decisions on the front of conditioning. So if someone has done no parkour and you're doing a first timers class, you have to teach them landings. In order to teach them landings, you have to get them to do a lot of landings and correct them and work through it with them and explain the rationale, and they'll usually take a little while to do it. And that is not a very good way to do it from a physiological standpoint. It can be quite a stress on their body. And I've had people be like, can I have a break? Because my legs are starting to really hurt. And the answer to that question is yes, of course you can. But yes, things can be practice and conditioning. Some things that are practice are conditioning because of the way that we have to do them. And it is also super important to recognize that some of the things that we have to do to teach people how to do certain movements, if we want them to learn them, are deliberately bad choices from a standpoint of conditioning. And I can't think of anything that is the converse, anything that is a bad conditioning choice for practice, but I'm sure one exists. So yes, something can be practice and conditioning simultaneously. And sometimes that's a bad thing, or a bad thing for one thing. All right. Does individuality also include some aspect of motivation, or is this beyond scope? Not in the context of aspects of fitness. So it's a little bit beyond scope for an exercise scientist or for thinking about the aspects of fitness. It more refers to the physiological differences. So if you give the same, you might have heard this already, give the same exercise plan to two different people and do it for the same amount of time with exactly the same conditions, they will not be good at the same things at the end. That is what individuality refers to in this context. People's motivation is absolutely relevant in the context of parkour instruction. We have to give people different input depending on what they need. Okay, so somebody may ask you, or may want you, they probably won't even ask you, but they will respond better if you're mean to them. And some people will respond better if you're very gentle with them. So, and that's kind of their individual way of processing what they need to do is different, and you have to give it to them differently. So it's beyond scope in the context of this lecture, but in the context of your parkour training and your coaching, it is absolutely relevant. So good question. What are some indicators that someone is not getting enough recovery? Oh, yeah. I'm sorry. I'm sad that was someone who was anonymous, because that's a really good question. If somebody is not getting enough recovery, they will generally start to feel it. So this is what we call being overtrained, right? If someone is not getting enough recovery, they will often start to feel tired. They will have body aches and pains, particularly in the joints affected, or the joints that are often used. They will have poor sleep. They will have appetite changes, and they will start to see a decrement in, or a decrement in their physical performance. So if you are getting inadequate recovery, and also sometimes people with uteruses will stop menstruating. There's a big problem with the female athlete triad, or let's call it the menstrual athlete triad, where people will stop menstruating and their bone density will drop, and yeah, all of this sort of thing will, these sorts of things will start to happen because particularly people who menstruate who do endurance sports put a lot of stress on their bodies, and their bodies start to suffer after time. So listlessness, poor sleep, changes in body composition. People will often like drop or lose or increase or lose or gain body fat. I said poor sleep, poor appetite, and changes in menstruation patterns, and a drop in their physical performance. And sometimes also, if someone is not getting adequate recovery for a very long period of time, they will start to have muscle tears, and also sometimes in joints that aren't fully prepared for what they are doing, they will start to experience stress fractures and stuff like that. So it can be pretty serious. Usually the answer is get more sleep, get more food, get more water, and do less. But you know, you often see people have, or like particularly people who have exercise addictions will struggle with one or more of those things. So they may actually require, you know, professional mental health help. Cheers, Alicia. Good to have you. Hope everything was clear. And catch you later, I hope. So that's done. Ollie asked, why does it cause lactic acid? Why does anaerobic glycolysis cause lactic acid? That is the byproduct. So when you burn sugar, the byproduct from that chemical reaction is lactic acid in animal tissue. So in human tissue and in other animal tissues. It's basically the same process as what we use to make alcohol. Yeast does the same thing, but instead of breaking down into lactic acid, it breaks down into what's that thing called? Alcohol. So essentially the same process of fermenting sugar is happening in our bodies. It's just the byproduct is different. The waste is different. And we can actually get energy out of lactic acid and get it back, but again, if it overwhelms the system, then we can't. So, okay. How long on average should rest periods be for HIIT training? So that's from Jack Carson. It kind of depends. So we're gonna use the periods of rest that are recommended for various. Actually, that's a really good question because I haven't actually covered that in the lecture. Rest periods are an important thing. So based on which energy system you're using, your system will recover at different speeds. So in order to get, I think it's 80% of your like ATP, PCR, like enzyme and fuel back, you need about 2 to 3 minutes. So anything less than that, if you're stressing somebody's ATP PCR system, their sprint system, then it's going to be important that you give them, 2 or 3 minutes rest, unless you want them to have a really huge training effect, So for things that are less intense, I generally go for a minute or less. But for things that are quite intense, so heavy lifting, for me, I will go for 2 minutes plus. And I also hear about, I think climbers as well, because they're training, like some of the things they train are very difficult for their tendons, and it's all about tendon tension. they will go 4 minutes or more for some of their heavy grip work or heavy hangboard training. They will do really extended rests for very, very short work bouts. So like 7 seconds on, 4 minutes off, that sort of thing. So I would advise, instead of me saying like, here are the hard and fast rules, this is true every time, I would like for you to think about like what energy system would be most likely involved. And based on that, how long is it likely to take for this person to recover? So generally for like high intensity, low volume training, so like power or heavy strength training, it will be 2 minutes or more. If somebody is trying to train their metabolic pathways, or someone wants to get better endurance, then we kind of deliberately want to make it a little bit hard for them. We don't want them to recover fully from it, so we'll give them less time, less rest. Okay, and that's why people who are interested in hypertrophy give themselves 1 minute of rest, because they are trying to give themselves metabolic fatigue. They're trying to make it too hard for their body on a mechanical and chemical level rather than on a neurological level. Okay, so I hope that answers your question. It's a little bit vaguer and more conceptual than perhaps we might like. Cool, thanks, Malk. Right. Would I recommend prescribing Olympic lifting for PK conditioning? Yes, I would. With the caveats that if you are not with the caveat that Olympic lifting is very skill heavy. It is very particular how you are supposed to do things. Some of the like snatches and stuff are not necessarily, they're not strength, well, they're strength feats, but they're also very, very skill dependent. So it may be better for you to just do, you know, the dumb muscle stuff like back squats than it is for you to do Olympic lifting. However, Olympic lifting is a very, very powerful training tool for developing power, because basically once it gets up, we don't care. We don't care what happens to it after that. What I see from sprinters and from fast runners, or runners who do like steeplechases and stuff, is they will do the pull phase, they'll do the hefty bit, and then they won't do the bit where they have to put it back. Okay, so Olympic lifters will do, or like as their supplementary training, Olympic lifters will do very, very, very heavy back squats and then just be like, done, don't want to re-rack it, gonna drop it. Okay, sprinters will do deadlifts but drop the weight in between the time they, like when they pick it up, it's up, I let it go, because I don't care about the down phase. I haven't covered muscle contraction types in this one, but if you look it up, concentric contraction, where it is shortening, where you are generating lots of power, that is the part at which we want to train for power. So I hope that answers that question. It's good, but you can do other stuff if you would like, but if you like it, do it, because it's good. What level of DOMS is a good level to have after training? Depends. So what I don't want you to take away from this, so DOMS is a very common side effect of training, but it does not constitute good training. It does not follow that if you are sore, sorry, I'm flipping around because I'm charging my phone. If you are sore, that does not mean you have had a good session. And if you are not sore, that does not mean you have had a bad session. Okay? DOMS is sometimes a marker of a training effect, but also I've like read a couple of articles that suggest that high like extremely high DOMs, actually like the muscular damage that has been caused by the exercise that is the reason for the pain actually requires more repair than a training effect can achieve. So you actually get diminishing returns if you're really, really, really sore. So it's kind of dependent, I would say. Instead of saying like, how much soreness should I have after training, you should track your performance and see how much increase in performance you have week to week. So if you are increasing it by 10% or 2% or 5% each week, if you're doing weights, for example, and you increase it by 2.5 kilo every week, then really good work. That's pretty impressive. But also that's a much better yardstick than how sore am I, because how sore you are doesn't necessarily equate to how well you've worked. And again, we want to be conditioning mindfully, not working out. So I hope that answers that question. In regards to the lactate threshold, as well as folks throwing up when they're overloaded to that particular energy system, is there ever a time when that level of overload is a desirable result of training, or is it one of those things that is more a psychological test but of no physical benefit? That's a good question. I would say, like, if you have gone to the point of throwing up, then you have already overloaded your system too much. We don't necessarily want to be comfortable when we are, particularly if we're doing lactate threshold training, like almost by necessity, that has to be super uncomfortable, because you're kind of starting to really push your body's ability to clear away a waste product that only occurs when you are working in the kind of upper reaches of your capacity. But, you know, if it is very impressive and good, I guess, if someone goes to the point where they throw up, because that speaks to a high level of like grit in that person. But again, it's kind of like the DOMS thing. You might get diminishing returns depending on what people do with that. And obviously, if you want someone to do 10 sprints and they do 2 sprints and then puke their guts up for 45 minutes, then they're not going to have the training effect that you want them to. So I hope that one is answered. Okay, how long on average? No, I've already answered that one. To follow up with the overtraining question, is it possible to condition ourselves to be able to train on a daily basis? If so, what's the general rule of thumb to do so without ending up overtraining? Yes, you can train every day. Some people do. I think Michael Kadori is an example of a parkour athlete who trains every day. That can be a little bit inappropriate depending on whether or not you are injured, or if you suddenly, say for the sake of argument, you clip your knees on a cat, or you shin yourself and your quad tendon, so the bottom of your quadricep is involved in that shinning, then it may not be appropriate for you to be training every day, because you can cause further damage to an injury if you don't rest it. However, there are many athletes, so most like Olympic gymnasts will train 6 days a week, and on their 7th day, you know, they're doing recovery work, they're doing mobility, or they're doing, you know, accessory work, or working on their nagging deficits, like their weak rotator cuff, or their slow serratus anterior activation, or something like that. Running athletes, some of the running athletes I've worked with do train every day, and if they're not training every day, it's either because they're injured or because they can't. They can't for another reason. Like training every day is the conditioning for training every day, I would say, because especially in parkour, because our training is so diverse and so freeform, it kind of will, like, you may not get the variety out of conditioning program that you might require to be able to train every day and be conditioned to training every day. However, I would say if you wanted a general rule of thumb to do daily training without overtraining, then one of the things I've seen running athletes do is they will mark down out of 5 how they are feeling, or like, how are you feeling emotionally? How are you feeling mentally? How have you slept? And how are you feeling physically? And they'll mark down out of 5 those 4 things. And if 3 out of 4 of those things is 4 or less, or 3 or less, then they modify or reduce their training. And if they are, 2 or less on all of those things, then they don't train. So it's kind of, you can monitor. So let's say in the context of being a parkour coach, you can like ask everybody during the warm-up how they're feeling today. If someone is already super tired, they had a big day yesterday and they trained a lot and then they got hungover, then you might want to modify their conditioning program. So that would be the way I do it. Just let yourself have the opportunity to self-monitor and allow for the possibility that you may not do as much training today as you might want. So I hope that answers it. Oh yeah, and also, like, when I say self-monitor, mark down on a piece of paper how you're feeling and compare it to how you are feeling on other days, and give it a numerical value so that it's quantifiable. If it's a bit, then do something else. So I hope that answers that question, Shaman. Let me know if it didn't. Any good resources on active recovery as opposed to rest? So active recovery, I haven't read much on, but I have done stuff on experientially. So this will be more anecdotal. And if you can find any resources yourself, then as long as they're like from a reputable source, like a journal or from a textbook or something like that, then take it from there. Cool. But yeah, generally active recovery is something that should engage the same muscle groups, but not in the same way or to the same intensity. And I think it should be, like, from memory, I think it is recommended that it is 50% or less. So on rest days, if you're taking a rest day, what is generally not recommended is playing video games the entire time. Okay, what is recommended is doing either gentle activity. So for the general population, most people, that'll look like going for a walk or doing some gardening or something like that. But for particularly for like elite athletes, that would mean, instead of doing a 30-minute tempo run on my Saturday, I'm going to instead do a 20-minute slow jog. I'm just going to go for a run with my partner and enjoy going down to the beach and going for a jog in the sand. It can be something like that. For a power athlete, that might be, on my rest day, I am going to do very, very lightweight squats with a barbell, and I'm only going to do maybe 3 sets of 8 or something like that. Okay, so if it is less than, let's say less than 60% is a good number, just arbitrary. I think the 50% one I've actually gotten from somewhere reputable, but don't quote me on that, because my knowledge on here isn't as good as it is on other stuff. So I hope that answers your question, but let me know if it doesn't. And when talking of recovery and rest, where do you see the role of active rest and non-active rest phases? Generally, we prefer active rest. Oh, sorry. Yeah. So the other thing that is good for rest and recovery is technique training. So if you are a Olympic lifter and you want your rest day to be a rest day, you might do, instead of doing 110 kilo power clean for three sets of three, instead you would do a 50 kilo squat for 8, for 1 to 3 sets of 8, and you would also work on some aspect of your training that is a deficit. So you would work on your hip drive, or you would work on your rotator cuff, or you would work on your activation, your neuromuscular activation of your upper back and your what are they called? Your rhomboids and your lower trap. God, there we go. Got there eventually. That sort of thing would be preferable. So some sort of technique training that is related to the primary training goal, but is not actually as strenuous as the training goal. Okay. Cheers, Dan. Hope you had fun. And so let's go back to the question that kickstarted that little thought process. When talking of recovery and rest, where do you see the role of active rest and non-active rest phases? I generally prefer active rest. Obviously, so for the general population, we want people to be sitting down as little as possible. Apparently, most people spend about, like 8 hours looking at a screen of some description or another, and that's, in the last 8 hours minimum, and that's only increased with the current situation of lockdown. But yeah, we want active recovery as much as we can, but it's okay if people don't do that. They're just going to have a less profound training effect. So the role of active rest is in, sorry, I might have misread your question. So active rest as in active recovery, deliberate recovery, stretches, deficit work, neuromuscular activation kind of work, is all super important, but also super important is your ability to get adequate sleep, get adequate nutrition, hydrate appropriately, all of that sort of thing. Bye, James. Hope it's been helpful. All of that sort of thing is super helpful. So paramount to that, I would say sleep, mobility, and also muscular activation for the purposes of the end goal. Okay. All right. How specific should training goals be? There's a super good and helpful psychological, or like, I don't know who originally came up with it, but it's like psychological / self-help stuff thing. And I'll get it up now. But it's SMART goals. So goals should be specific. What's the M? I forget. Measurable, actionable, realistic, and time sensitive. Okay, so instead of saying, "Oh yeah, I want to get better at my my standing precision," you should be specific about it. So I want to get better at. I want to increase my standing precision by this amount. Okay, so that's specific and it's measurable. Okay, as opposed to I want to get better at parkour. I want to get better at my standing precision. I want to get better at it this much. I want to get better at it by doing 2 sessions a week based on my my availability and my current training. That is achievable for me, and I want it to get better by a realistic amount, and I want it to get better in a realistic amount of time. So if any part of that is not present, then it becomes a little bit harder for you to achieve those goals. So if you say, I want to get better at my standing precision, I'm going to work on it twice a week, and at the end I'm going to have increased it by 4 feet in 2.5 weeks, then it's not going to be realistic. So the acronym SMART: specific, measurable, actionable, realistic, and time sensitive is a really good way to do it. And I hope that answers that question. So, and that applies also to any kind of quantitative strength work. So, I want to increase my 1 rep max by 10%, that sort of thing is all super, super actionable. All right. What are some good ways of tracking progress toward conditioning goals over time? So the thing that I always have defaulted to, oh, my hair's gone funny. The thing I've always defaulted to is measuring your maximal output. So this is the gold standard for resistance training is your 1 rep max. And it is so useful and so kind of robust a measurement that most of the things that we were looking at just a second ago were about the 1 rep max. So like percentage of 1 rep max, it should be at 60%. So what I generally do with clients is I would get, particularly not just parkour clients, but personal training clients, people who want to just get stronger. I test what their current performance on the things they want to improve is, and then we do a program, do a set amount of stuff, maybe 4 to 6 weeks, and then at the end of that we retest. We test again and see if what happened, what we did, actually did anything to their performance in the markers that they want performance in. And if that's not the case, if they didn't have any improvement, or if they went backwards, then we have to go back and look at what we were doing and go back to the drawing board. So that's a really easy way to do it. If like sometimes it's a little bit hard to do that with parkour, because some of the kind of the goals or the markers of our training are a bit subjective. So like if you want to get a planche, or if you want to get some kind of calisthenics goal, then it can be a little bit subjective. But yeah, I would say retest regularly. So every 6 weeks, let's say, every 4 weeks, every month, you have a day where you're like, right, I'm going to fully rest the day before, then I'm going to test out how good I am at this thing. And if the answer to your question is, or if the answer to that question, how good am I at this thing, is I've gotten worse, then you have a discrete block of time in which you've done a specific thing for that training goal, and it hasn't worked. Does that help? So I hope that answers your question, Alessandra. On the topic of staying hydrated, how much water would you recommend? This one's a little bit like how much is a piece of string. So I've read somewhere, like the statistic was for American population, but it was something like 75% of Americans are chronically dehydrated. And I'm not sure about that. I would like to see the study that cited that, but intuitively, I guess it's believable. But yeah, so more like generally, if your pee is clear, you're good. Is as far as I am able to dig into that without reading up on it first. I would say it's also kind of dependent on what you're doing. So exercise consumes water, by necessity. It's part of the process of accessing energy. So if you have if someone has a very, very high level of training and they train almost daily, then they're going to need a lot more water than someone who perhaps doesn't train as hard or as far or as long or whatever. So it's a bit of a knotty one. I don't know. Is 1 gallon of water too much? I don't know. Do you feel sick afterwards? Are you drinking it in one go? If you feel okay, that's probably okay. There is such a thing as water intoxication. So yeah, don't drink. Don't down a whole 10-liter bag. But other than that, if you feel okay and you're not experiencing any symptoms of like hyponatremia or anything, then you should be all right. Okay. All good. All right. I think that was the last question. So if you have a burning question that you really want to ask, most people have left now, but if you have a question you want to ask now and you're kind of like, oh, it's a stupid question, he's going to think I'm dumb, then absolutely not. Like, just please ask it anyway. But other than that, I'll give you a minute or 30 seconds or so, and then I might go.
Amazing. I might just jump in.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much. I might just jump in quickly.
You got one.
Is that gonna switch?
Which one? Oh, yeah. Hang on a sec, Philip. I think Philip had a question in the chat, right? Yeah, thanks for that, Martin. I did miss that.
It's about wrist mobility, wasn't it?
Oh, yeah. I have been training my wrist flexibility for quite a while now, but see no real improvements. What type of stretching do you recommend for this? I often get mixed ideas about the right stretching. The right stretching is whatever stretching your body responds well to. So I respond quite well to static stretching for my goals, but other people don't. I know Evie doesn't respond all that well to static stretching. Their body just is a bit resistant to that. So yeah, the most effective, in the literature at least, the most effective stretching techniques are eccentric training, from my understanding, which I think Peter is going to do a mobility lecture next Sunday, right?
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah, so I might be a bit out of my wheelhouse now. And if you hear anything in the next lecture that conflicts with anything here, then probably listen to her, not me, because she's literally a strength and conditioning coach. But yeah, so my understanding is that eccentric training, as in letting things out through their own range, is really helpful for mobility, as well as kind of PNF stretching. So if I was stretching my wrist, that would be getting a weight and letting it out, and also doing this, pushing back, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and relax. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, relax. PNF stretching and eccentric training, super effective. Static stretching is less effective. I would say as well, if you have stiff wrists, some people have like more stiff ligaments in their wrists, and the rest of their bodies than others. So you may struggle, or if you have very deep bone grooves, your like joint is very solid and robustly built, then you will struggle with developing range in a way that other people might not. So this is like why it's not essential to have some of these things. So like I know one guy who just mechanically can't do a squat. He just can't do it. So it's not essential, but it is helpful. So if you are experiencing wrist pain regularly, if you're getting pains here, and you're asking, don't just say like, I have bad wrist mobility because Harry said I should have this much wrist mobility. Like, if it's worrying you and worrying at you, then I would say look into loaded stretching stretches, so eccentric as well as eccentric training as well as PNF stretches, because generally loaded stretches do a better job of achieving flexibility than, you know, unloaded or static stretches. And yeah, also try to build up the muscle or the muscles and tendons in your wrist, got there eventually, wrist and forearm, to protect the joint, because they will, like, basically the stretch reflex is about protecting joints and muscles. So massive oversimplification, but if it is an unstable position, your body will not let you get there. So yeah, convincing yourself, like, that's why PNF is good and why eccentric is good, because you are exerting force in that end range. So yeah, try that, see how you go, I guess. And other than that, might go. Anything else? Anything else, Kel?
I just want to say thank you very much. Appreciate it. You did an amazing job.
Cheers.
Thank you. Thanks to everyone for coming along. The recordings will be up in a number of formats, so keep an eye out for that. And next week,
Hey. Hi, Panda.
Hi, Panda. Next week, we'll be doing Introduction to Self-Massage with Peter Gleister, my sister. She's a massage therapist, strength and conditioning coach. So come along to that. And love to you all, especially Harry.
Cool.
Thanks
so much. All right. I had fun. I hope you had fun and your brain is okay. All right. Bye. Bye. Hanging up now. Bye.
See you, Harry. And for everyone who's still here, you'll probably get a link to a Google form. So if you've got suggestions for further lectures, please shoot them our way.